Time for another episode of Paraphrase Power. Remember, the key here is to learn how to summarize or paraphrase a passage or even a sentence or even a phrase to really understand what the author is trying to say. Because on SAT and ACT reading, the key is finding out what is actually in the passage, not what you think is in the passage or what we think the author is really saying, but really keeping it simple and figuring out what is simply going on in the passage on a basic fundamental level. And that's what Paraphrase Power helps us practice. In this episode, we're going to have a dual passage, a dual short passage. And what we're going to do is we're going to do each of these passages individually, and then we're also going to talk about the relationship between the two passages, and then we'll look at a question. So first thing I want you to do is read passage 1 and then paraphrase it. Think in your head, 1, 2, or 3 sentence paraphrase about what this passage is trying to say. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so what is the summary of this paragraph? Basically, the author does not like shopping. When he or she goes shopping, we'll say it's a he. When he goes shopping, he makes it very clear about what he's going to get and doesn't want to waste any time browsing, just wants to get in there, get out. As we can see at the end, life is too short to take risks when I know exactly what I want already. So, very anti-shopping, just wants to get what he needs, doesn't want to make it more complicated than that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and read passage 2 and do the same thing. Paraphrase it. In passage 2, we have an author who is much more positive towards shopping, thinks that shopping is a time to try things on and to perhaps discover things about yourself that you didn't in the first place. So we can see this last sentence, I think, sums it up. Still, few people would give up the possibility of discovering that they are more interesting than they suspect. Earlier, shopping invites us to engage in the play that can lead to self-discovery. So this author is much more interested in finding new things and trying things on and learning more about himself in the process. Okay, so those are your paraphrases. Now, whenever we deal with a dual passage, you want to take some time to think about what is the relationship between these two passages. And that relationship can be similar arguments, opposite arguments, or no real relationship. So take a minute, think to yourself, what is the relationship between these two passages? How would we characterize their arguments as opposed to one another, or as the same as one another, or no relationship? So go ahead and do that. So it's probably relatively clear that the passages here are opposite to one another, because passage 1 is not at all interested in shopping, wants to get in, get out, and as we can see at the end, the author says, I know exactly what I want already, so there's no reason to waste any time browsing or doing other things. Whereas passage 2, the whole point is this author likes to shop, and his point is that I try things on because maybe I will discover something about myself that I didn't know. So the opposite point is made really towards the end of these paragraphs, where in passage 1, the author says, I know what I want already. And passage 2 is saying, I don't really know what I want already because I'm going to learn something new about myself. I didn't know, maybe I look good in this, or maybe this compliments me in some particular way. So these are very opposite to one another. And as we're going to see in this practice question, finding this relationship between the passages really helps us answer a question like number 9, which is how the authors primarily differ in their attitudes towards time spent shopping. So go ahead and try number 9. So let's see what our choices are for number 9. A, the author of passage 1 views it, shopping, as a necessary evil, while the author of passage 2 sees it as a costly proposition. Evil is a pretty strong word here, but I think necessary evil does make a kind of sense, right? The author, it's an exercise in pragmatism, so you have to do it because you need something, so it's a necessary evil. So we might grant that, but a costly proposition does not work at all for passage 2. Passage 2 doesn't see it as costly in any kind of negative sense, so we can get rid of A. The author of passage 1 views it as a major imposition, while the author of passage 2 sees it as a potentially enriching experience. Yeah, for passage 1, it's kind of a hassle to go out and shop. Doesn't really want to do it, only does it because he has to. Whereas passage 2, he sees it as something that he can get something out. Get some sort of information about himself, learn something about himself. So it is a potentially enriching experience. B looks really good. This captures that opposite relationship between the passages very well. The author of passage 1 views it as a difficult task to schedule, while the author of passage 2 sees it as part of a daily routine. Nothing in passage 1 really talks about that it's hard to schedule this in his day or anything like that. That's really specific and not mentioned. And in passage 2, we don't really see it as part of a daily routine either. So when we get to the specifics of choice C, we see neither of those really fit in with what the main point of each passage was. The author of passage 1 views it as a guilty pleasure, while the author of passage 2 sees it as an exciting aspect of contemporary life. I mean, maybe the second part here works a little bit. Maybe it's a bit strong, but perhaps fits. But author of passage 1 does not see it as a guilty pleasure. The author of passage 1 does not like to shop at all. The author of passage 1 views it as a social activity, while the author of passage 2 sees it as a solitary endeavor. I don't think either of these really fits. Passage 1 doesn't say anything about it being social. Passage 2 sees it as a solitary endeavor. Not really. I mean, I guess in some sense, but again, these just don't fit. They don't capture the opposite relationship as we discussed in our paraphrases, as well as does choice B. And that is our answer. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll, and you can find the link in the description below the video.